Millionaire hires a fake wife to cover his mother's eyes. He's shocked because she's so beautiful. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. And now, let's return to our main character. His name is Ethan Cole, a self-made millionaire who built a logistics empire before 35. A man who measures life in margins, deadlines, and quarterly reports, not in feelings, not in family dinners, not in the soft questions his mother has been asking for years, the kind that always end the same way, with a quiet sigh and eyes turned away. That morning, Ethan sits in the back seat of his black sedan, skimming financial headlines on a tablet, when his phone vibrates with a message from his assistant reminding him of lunch at his mother's house, and his jaw tightens because he already knows what's coming. His mother, Margaret Cole, is old school, sharp-eyed, and relentless when it comes to one thing, the legacy of the Cole name, which to her means grandchildren, family photos, and a son who is not always alone. The moment he steps into her sunlit dining room, she studies him the way she always does, not for his success, not for his tailored suit, but for what's missing beside him, and before the soup even cools, she says it again, calmly, firmly. Ethan, you cannot keep showing up alone. He tries to deflect, jokes about work, about travel, about how relationships complicate things, but she doesn't smile. She tells him the doctors have been honest, time matters now, and she wants to see him settled, married, before her eyes close for good. That is the moment Ethan feels something rare and dangerous creep into his chest, not fear of loss, but fear of losing control. He leaves her house with the weight of that conversation pressing down harder than any boardroom confrontation ever has. And by the time he reaches his office overlooking the city, he has already done what he always does when emotions threaten to interfere. He turns the problem into a transaction. He calls his legal counsel, his assistant, lays out a plan with chilling efficiency, a temporary arrangement, a role to be filled, no romance, no risk, just appearances. I need someone intelligent, discreet, and willing to sign a contract, he says flatly. This is strictly business. A few hours later, in a quiet conference room that smells faintly of coffee and polished wood, the door opens, and she walks in. Her name is Claire Bennett. She is not dressed to impress. No designer labels, no dramatic entrance, just simple heels, a clean blouse, and eyes that hold a calm strength Ethan does not expect. She sits across from him, listening as his lawyer outlines the terms, the compensation, the expectations, the timeline. And when Ethan finally looks up from the paperwork to assess her the way he assesses everything else, he freezes. Not because she is glamorous in a loud way, not because she looks like someone chasing money, but because she is quietly, undeniably beautiful, the kind of beauty that feels out of place in a room built for contracts and control. For the first time in years, Ethan loses his train of thought, and Claire notices. She notices the hesitation, the way his fingers pause on the pen, and she waits, because waiting is something she has learned to do well. When he clears his throat and explains the situation in his own words, that his mother must believe the marriage is real, that public appearances will be required, that emotions are not part of the deal, Claire does not interrupt. She simply asks one question, soft but steady. And what happens when the truth comes out? Ethan answers without hesitation, it won't. And in that moment, neither of them knows that this lie, carefully packaged as a solution, is about to unravel everything he believes he can control. Claire Bennett leaves the glass tower an hour later with a folder tucked under her arm and a quiet ringing in her ears, the kind that comes after a decision you know will change the direction of your life, whether you are ready or not. Outside, the afternoon traffic crawls, horns echo, and people hurry past without noticing her, which feels familiar. She walks 3 blocks to the subway, replaying every word from that conference room, the calm legal language, the numbers. Spoken without emotion, the way Ethan Cole never once raised his voice, yet controlled the room completely. For him, this was a problem solved before dinner. For her, it is survival. Claire lives in a small walk-up apartment on the edge of the city, the kind with thin walls and a radiator that knocks at night. And when she unlocks her door, the first thing she sees is the past she has been trying to outrun. A stack of unopened envelopes sits on the counter, final notices printed in red, rent, medical bills, interest fees that grow faster than hope. Her phone buzzes with a missed call from her sister, and she already knows what it means. Their mother's condition has not improved, and the insurance coverage ran out weeks ago. Claire sinks into the only chair in the room and exhales slowly, pressing her palms together the way she does when panic threatens to take over. She thinks about the offer again, the amount written clearly on the page, enough to erase the debt, enough to buy time, enough to keep her family from slipping one step closer to something they might not come back from. It is not greed that tightens her chest. It is dignity. She has always worked for what she had, taken the long way, said no when shortcuts came with strings attached. But this is not a shortcut. This is a trade. The next morning, Claire returns to the building, hair neatly pulled back, shoulders squared, determined to set boundaries before anyone else sets them for her. This time, Ethan is already waiting, standing by the window, hands in his pockets, the city spread out behind him like a map he owns. He turns when he hears her footsteps, and for a brief moment, something unreadable crosses his face before the professional mask settles back in place. They sit. The lawyer reviews the terms again, slower now, more deliberate. Duration, appearances, compensation, confidentiality. When the lawyer asks if she has questions, Claire does not look at the paper. She looks directly at Ethan. She tells him she will not lie to his mother beyond what is necessary. She will not humiliate herself for his relatives. She will not be treated as disposable. If she is going to stand beside him, even as a role, she expects respect in public and in private. The room goes quiet. Ethan studies her in a way he did not yesterday, not assessing her value, but recalibrating his expectations. He nods once. He agrees. When the pen is finally placed in her hand, Claire hesitates just long enough to acknowledge the weight of the moment, then signs. The sound of ink on paper feels louder than it should. As she hands the contract back, Ethan surprises her by standing and extending his hand, not as a formality, but as something closer to acknowledgement. She shakes it, firm and brief. There is no smile, only an understanding. Later, as she rides the elevator down, Claire stares at her reflection in the mirrored wall. She looks the same, but everything else has shifted. Somewhere across town, Ethan sits alone in his office long after his staff has left, the signed contract resting on his desk. He tells himself this is still control, still strategy, still clean. But when he closes his eyes, the image that returns is not the numbers or the plan. It is the way Claire held his gaze when she set her conditions, unafraid, unbought, and for reasons he does not yet understand. That unsettles him far more than any risk he thought he was taking. The first rule Ethan enforces is distance, not physical distance, but emotional distance, the kind that makes everything feel organized and safe. The next morning, Claire is escorted into a private fitting suite inside a boutique that overlooks the river, where a stylist waits with measured politeness and racks of clothing chosen not for trends, but for image. Claire stands still as measurements are taken, fabric brushed against her skin, mirrors catching angles she rarely looks at twice. She is told what colors photograph well, what silhouettes convey stability, what details suggest old money rather than desperation. She listens without argument, because she understands this is not about beauty, it is about translation, turning her into something the world Ethan inhabits will accept without asking questions. Later that afternoon, she is given a small velvet box. Inside is a ring, understated, elegant, expensive without being loud. Ethan explains it is not a gift. It is a prop. No diamond large enough to invite gossip. No inscription that suggests permanence. Claire slips it onto her finger, feeling its unfamiliar weight settle there. And for a second, she wonders how many decisions in life look harmless until you start wearing them every day. The rules are reviewed again that evening over dinner in a private room at a quiet restaurant, chosen deliberately so no one overhears. Ethan lays them out clearly. No shared bedroom. No public affection beyond what is necessary. No improvisation in front of his mother. Appearances must be consistent. Claire adds one rule of her own. If she is expected to answer questions, she wants the truth ahead of time, names, dates, details, so she does not stumble into lies that hurt someone unintentionally. Ethan agrees, surprised by her foresight. For the first time, the arrangement feels less like a transaction and more like a partnership, and that realization makes him uncomfortable. The first test comes sooner than expected. 2 days later, Ethan drives Claire to his mother's house himself, declining the driver without explanation. The neighborhood is quiet, lined with mature trees and homes that have been standing longer than most companies he competes with. As they pull into the driveway, Claire's pulse quickens, not from fear, but from awareness. This is where the story becomes real. Margaret Cole opens the door with cautious curiosity that melts into warmth the moment she sees Claire. She takes her hands gently, studies her face, and smiles the kind of smile that does not belong to someone who has been fooled easily in life. Claire feels something twist in her chest as Margaret welcomes her inside, offering tea, asking about her family, her work, her interests, not interrogating, just genuinely interested. Claire answers carefully, honestly where she can, respectfully where she cannot. Ethan watches from across the room, noticing details he did not plan for, the way his mother relaxes, the way she laughs more freely, the way she looks at Claire as if something she feared losing has already been returned. When Margaret excuses herself to the kitchen, she squeezes Ethan's arm and whispers, "She is lovely," with a softness that makes him look away. On the drive back, neither of them speaks at first. The city lights flicker on as dusk settles, and the silence stretches until Claire finally says what has been sitting between them. She tells him his mother deserves happiness, not illusions, and if this is going to work, it has to be handled with care. Ethan responds sharply, reminding her of the contract, the timeline, the boundaries, but his voice lacks conviction. That night, alone in his penthouse, he removes his watch, sets it on the counter, and stares at the ring still on Claire's finger in his mind. He tells himself this is temporary, controlled, necessary. But somewhere between the quiet of his apartment and the memory of his mother's smile, a crack forms in the structure he built so carefully, and for the first time, Ethan Cole realizes that pretending might cost him more than telling the truth ever could. By the end of the first week, the arrangement begins to take on a rhythm neither of them expected. Claire moves into the guest suite of Ethan's penthouse, a space designed for short stays and minimal traces, and she treats it exactly that way, unpacking only what she needs, folding her clothes with care, never assuming permission that has not been given. Each morning, a schedule arrives on her phone outlining meetings, dinners, and appearances where she will be introduced simply as Ethan's wife, and each time she reads the word, it lands with a weight she does not comment on. Publicly, they are seamless. At a charity luncheon, Claire remembers names after hearing them once, thanks donors without sounding impressed, and listens more than she speaks. Ethan notices people respond to her immediately, not because she is standing beside him, but because she makes them feel seen, and that was not part of the plan. At a formal dinner with business partners, someone makes a careless remark about her background, and before Ethan can intervene, Claire redirects the conversation with quiet confidence, neither defensive nor apologetic. The table relaxes. Ethan feels something shift, respect, not for how well she plays the role, but for how naturally she carries herself within it. In private, the rules still stand, but the edges soften. They begin sharing late evening conversations in the kitchen, not about feelings, but about logistics, travel, childhood routines, small facts exchanged without intent. Claire learns Ethan drinks his coffee black because it saves time, not because he prefers it. Ethan learns Claire used to sketch city skylines when she could not sleep, imagining places she might one day belong. None of it violates the contract, but all of it builds something unnamed. The second visit to Margaret's house feels different. This time, Margaret insists Claire help her in the garden, asks her opinions on recipes, confides stories about Ethan as a child, how he used to line up toy trucks by size and cried when plans changed. Claire listens, smiling softly, offering no judgment. Ethan watches from the porch, unsettled by how easily his mother opens up, by how this woman he hired has become a presence he did not anticipate. On the drive home, Margaret squeezes Claire's hand and thanks her for making Ethan less distant, and Claire says nothing, because she knows the credit does not belong to her alone. That night, Ethan stands at the edge of the city facing windows, jacket draped over a chair, thinking about the way his mother's voice sounded lighter, about how the house felt fuller. He tells himself this is the purpose of the arrangement working as intended. But later, when he hears Claire laugh softly on the phone with her sister, relief and exhaustion tangled in her voice, he pauses outside the guest suite door longer than necessary. The following weekend brings a larger test, a corporate gala filled with cameras, board members, and people who believe they know Ethan Cole completely. Claire wears a simple dress chosen for elegance rather than spectacle, and as they enter the ballroom together, the room's attention shifts toward her instantly. Ethan feels it, the looks, the curiosity, the unspoken questions, and for the first time, he is not irritated by it. When a reporter asks how long they have been married, Claire answers smoothly, glancing at Ethan with a familiarity that looks real even to him. Later, when an investor corners her with probing questions about her intentions, Claire deflects with grace, praising Ethan's work, never diminishing herself, never overstepping. As the evening ends, Ethan realizes something unsettling. He has stopped monitoring her performance. He trusts her. In the quiet car ride home, the city lights streak past, and neither speaks until Claire removes the ring and sets it carefully in its box. She tells him she will wear it again tomorrow. He nods, but the absence on her finger feels heavier than its presence ever did. That night, alone with his thoughts, Ethan admits a truth he has been avoiding. The role is no longer the difficult part. It is the idea of losing her once it ends that now feels like the greater risk. The morning of the board-hosted benefit arrives with a different weight than the previous events, heavier, sharper, because this one is not just social but strategic, a gathering where reputation quietly determines future power. Claire senses it the moment the itinerary appears on her phone, the names listed, the donors whose opinions shape Ethan's company from behind closed doors, the family members who have always measured worth by lineage rather than character. As they prepare, the air between her and Ethan is calm but taut, neither mentioning the unspoken understanding that tonight will test more than her ability to play a role. The venue is a historic hotel downtown, marble floors polished to a mirror shine, chandeliers casting warm light over conversations that sound friendly but cut precisely. When Ethan and Claire step inside together, the attention is immediate and sustained, not because Ethan is expected, but because Claire belongs there in a way no one anticipated. She greets people with a steady smile, remembering details she has heard only once, responding without hesitation, her posture relaxed yet composed. Ethan watches from half a step away, ready to intervene if needed, but the moment never comes. Instead, it is one of his distant relatives who creates the first fracture, a woman who smiles too tightly and asks Claire where she studied, how long she has known Ethan, whether she plans to step away from work now that she is married so well. The questions are framed politely, but the intent beneath them is unmistakable. Claire answers calmly, acknowledging her path without apology, making it clear she chose it, just as she chose to stand here now. The conversation shifts, interest replaced by unease, and Ethan feels a flicker of something unfamiliar, pride, sharp and unplanned. Later, during the dinner, a board member makes a pointed joke about appearances and arrangements, testing the waters, and for a brief second, the room stills. Claire does not glance at Ethan for permission. She responds with warmth, thanking the board for supporting causes that matter, emphasizing that partnership, in business and in life, is built on shared values, not assumptions. The room relaxes again, laughter returning, but Ethan notices how several people look at her differently now, with respect rather than curiosity. As dessert is served, Margaret arrives, having insisted on attending despite Ethan's concerns. She takes Claire's hand, introduces her proudly to friends Ethan has known his entire life, and for the first time, Claire feels the full weight of what this illusion provides: comfort, reassurance, a sense of continuity that Margaret has been craving. When the evening draws to a close, a donor pulls Ethan aside and compliments his wife, not on her beauty, but on her presence, telling him she grounds the room. Ethan nods, accepting the praise, but something tightens in his chest because he knows this success was not engineered. It was earned. On the drive home, Claire exhales slowly, the controlled composure finally slipping. She admits the night was harder than she expected, that being judged so openly still stings. Ethan responds instinctively, telling her she handled it better than anyone could have, his voice firm, sincere, and she looks at him then, surprised by the lack of distance between them. When they reach the penthouse, Claire removes the ring and places it carefully on the counter as always, but this time, Ethan does not look away. He realizes the arrangement has crossed an invisible threshold. It is no longer just about convincing others. It is about how deeply the performance is shaping the truth beneath it. And as he watches Claire retreat to her room, the question that lingers is no longer whether she can continue the role, but whether he can accept the cost of ending it. The shift happens quietly, without announcement, in the hours after the gala, when the noise of obligation finally fades, and what remains cannot be managed by schedules or contracts. The next morning, Ethan wakes earlier than usual and finds Claire already in the kitchen, standing by the counter with a mug warming her hands, the city still half asleep beyond the glass. She startles slightly when he enters, then relaxes, offering a small smile that feels less practiced than before. They talk about nothing important at first, the weather, a delayed flight she heard about on the news, the way the city smells different after rain, and yet every word carries an awareness neither of them names. Later that day, Ethan cancels a non-essential meeting without explanation, something his assistant notices but does not question. He drives them out of the city himself, claiming his mother requested another visit, though that is not entirely true. The road winds through quieter neighborhoods and then into open stretches where the skyline fades behind them, and the silence in the car is not tense but thoughtful. Claire watches the scenery pass, thinking about how often she has adapted, stepped into roles she never imagined, and how this one feels more dangerous precisely because it no longer feels forced. At Margaret's house, the afternoon unfolds gently. They sit on the back porch with iced tea, listening as Margaret talks about the past, about regrets she rarely shares, about wishing she had spent less time worrying about appearances and more time trusting her instincts. Claire listens closely, responding with care, while Ethan hears his mother differently than he ever has, noticing the vulnerability beneath her certainty. When Margaret grows tired and excuses herself, leaving them alone, the quiet settles in a way that feels intentional. Claire finally speaks, telling Ethan that she never expected this arrangement to feel so personal, that she worries about the moment it ends, not for herself, but for his mother. Ethan responds slowly, choosing honesty over control, admitting that he has not thought past the end date, because thinking beyond it feels like acknowledging something he does not know how to handle. The drive back stretches long and quiet, the sun lowering until the car fills with amber light. That evening, as the penthouse grows still, Claire sits alone on the balcony, sketchbook open on her lap for the first time in months, lines forming without conscious thought, shapes of buildings she recognizes not from memory, but from proximity. Ethan steps outside, stopping short when he sees what she is doing. He does not comment on the drawing. Instead, he asks how long she has been carrying that part of herself quietly, and the question opens something in her she did not plan to share. She tells him about nights spent awake worrying, about the fear of becoming invisible, about how difficult it is to accept help without feeling diminished by it. Ethan listens without interrupting, without offering solutions, and when she finishes, the silence that follows is not empty. It is full of recognition. He admits that control has always felt safer than vulnerability, that contracts protect him from disappointment, but that lately, the certainty he built his life around feels less convincing than the trust she shows without asking for anything in return. For a moment, the distance between them narrows, not physically, but emotionally, and the rules they set begin to feel like fragile ideas, rather than fixed boundaries. Claire stands, closing her sketchbook, and thanks him for listening, a simple phrase that carries more weight than any promise. As she turns to leave, Ethan stops her, not with a gesture, but with words, telling her that if this ever stops feeling right, she should say so, and he will listen. She nods, understanding the offer for what it is, a crack in his armor, an invitation without expectation. Later that night, as Ethan lies awake staring at the ceiling, he realizes the truth he has been avoiding. The greatest risk is no longer exposure or scandal. It is the possibility that what started as an arrangement has become the one place where he feels most honest, and that honesty may demand a choice he can no longer postpone. The tension arrives disguised as routine, slipping into their lives on a morning that begins like any other, with schedules, messages, and carefully controlled expectations. Ethan is halfway through a conference call when his assistant interrupts with an apology that sounds rehearsed, explaining that someone has requested an urgent meeting, someone who should not know anything about his personal affairs. The name lands heavily, his cousin Daniel, a shareholder with a talent for smiling while sharpening knives. By the time Ethan steps into the private office overlooking the city, Daniel is already there, leaning casually against the desk, a thin folder in his hand, and curiosity lit too brightly in his eyes. He does not waste time. He asks how long the marriage has been an arrangement and how long Ethan planned to keep pretending. Ethan feels the floor shift beneath him, not because the accusation is unexpected, but because the timing is precise. Daniel slides the folder forward, just enough for Ethan to see the edge of the contract, the signatures unmistakable. He explains calmly that information travels quickly when people are careless, that curiosity leads to conclusions, and that conclusions, if shared at the wrong moment, can destabilize everything Ethan has built. The threat is not spoken directly. It does not need to be. That evening, Claire senses the change before Ethan says a word. His replies are clipped, distracted, his attention split in a way she has learned to recognize. When he finally tells her what happened, he does so without embellishment, laying out the facts as if stripping them of emotion will. Keep the damage contained. Claire listens, her hands folded in her lap, feeling the familiar weight of being judged without context settle back into her chest. She asks one question, quiet but firm, whether his mother knows. Ethan shakes his head, then admits Daniel hinted that Margaret may already be hearing whispers. The word echoes between them, whispers, because both understand how fragile comfort can be when built on assumptions. The next day confirms their fears. Margaret calls unexpectedly, asking Claire to come by alone, her voice warm but tight in a way that suggests concern. Claire does not hesitate. She dresses simply, leaving the ring behind, a decision she makes without consulting anyone. When she arrives, Margaret greets her kindly, but the questions follow soon after, subtle at first, about how she and Ethan met, about timing, about decisions made quickly. Claire answers honestly where she can, carefully where she must, but the distance grows with every word unsaid. Finally, Margaret asks directly whether Claire is happy, and the sincerity of the question breaks something open. Claire admits she cares deeply for Ethan, that she respects him, that she never intended to cause harm. Margaret studies her for a long moment, then says she hopes that is true, because harm has a way of arriving quietly. When Claire leaves, the air feels heavier than when she arrived. That night, Ethan and Claire sit across from each other in the penthouse, the space between them filled with everything they have avoided naming. Claire tells him she will step away if that is what protects his mother, his company, his peace. She says it without resentment, because she understands sacrifice better than most. Ethan reacts instinctively, insisting they cannot give Daniel control, that this is manipulation, but the words sound hollow even to him. For the first time, the contract on the counter feels less like protection and more like a weapon waiting to be used. The following morning, a message circulates among the board, vague but pointed, referencing integrity, transparency, and leadership. No names are mentioned, but the implication is clear. Ethan realizes the crisis is no longer theoretical. It is unfolding. As Claire packs a small overnight bag, not to leave forever, but to create space, Ethan watches, unable to stop her, unable to promise what he does not yet know how to deliver. When she pauses at the door and looks back at him, there is no accusation in her eyes, only sadness and trust, and that combination cuts deeper than anger ever could. As the door closes behind her, Ethan stands alone with the truth he has been avoiding. The greatest threat is not exposure. It is the realization that protecting his image may cost him the one person who entered his life without an agenda, and that choosing safety over honesty may leave him with nothing worth defending. The decision does not arrive with certainty, but with clarity, the kind that feels heavier because it cannot be ignored. The morning after Claire leaves, Ethan sits alone in the boardroom long after the meeting ends, the city spread beneath him like a promise he no longer finds comforting. The message Daniel circulated has done its work, planting doubt without proof, forcing questions that cannot be answered with silence. When Ethan's phone rings and Margaret's name appears on the screen, he knows avoidance is no longer an option. She asks him to come by that evening, her voice steady but serious, and for the first time, he does not try to negotiate time. He drives to her house without stopping at the office, without rehearsing explanations, carrying only the truth he has delayed too long. Claire arrives separately, at Margaret's request, unaware of what Ethan has decided, her heart guarded but open in the way that makes retreat harder. They sit together in the living room, the same space where the illusion first found comfort, and Margaret wastes no time. She tells them she knows there has been an arrangement, not every detail, but enough to understand that something important has been hidden from her. The disappointment in her voice is quiet, not sharp, which makes it worse. Claire speaks first, apologizing without excuses, explaining why she agreed, why she stayed, why she came to care. Even when she knew the ending was written in ink, she did not control. Ethan listens, his chest tightening as he hears his own choices reflected back to him in her words. When Margaret turns to him, waiting, he does not reach for the contract, the justification, or the strategy. He tells her everything. He admits he hired Claire out of fear of disappointing her, fear of vulnerability, fear of living without control. He admits the arrangement changed him, that what began as a lie became the most honest connection he has allowed himself in years. The room goes still. Margaret closes her eyes briefly, then opens them with a steadiness that surprises them both. She tells Ethan that she would rather face uncertainty than be protected by deception, that love, even when imperfect, deserves truth. She turns to Claire and thanks her for the kindness she showed, for the joy she brought into a house that had felt empty for too long. When Ethan reaches into his jacket and pulls out the contract, the paper feels thinner than it once did. He places it on the table and tears it cleanly in half, then again, until the words that govern their lives are no longer readable. He tells Claire that whatever happens next will not be written by obligation. If she walks away, he will accept it. If she stays, it will be because she chooses to, not because she was hired to. Claire looks at the torn paper, then at Margaret, then back at Ethan, seeing not the man who controlled every outcome, but the one standing without armor. The silence stretches, filled with the weight of consequences and possibility. Claire does not rush her answer. She tells him that trust is not restored by gestures alone, but that honesty is where it begins. She says she is not ready to promise forever, but she is willing to stay and see what is real without a script. Ethan nods, relief and fear colliding. Knowing this is the first agreement he has entered without leverage. As they leave Margaret's house together, not as a performance, but as two people uncertain and exposed, Ethan understands the cost of his choice. He has lost control, but for the first time, what remains feels worth more than everything he built to avoid this moment. The months that follow are quieter than the storm that preceded them, but they carry a depth neither of them anticipated. Claire does not move back into the guest suite immediately. Instead, she returns to her small apartment, reclaiming space that reminds her who she was before contracts and expectations rewrote her days. Ethan respects the distance, not as a strategy, but as proof that this time, choice matters more than proximity. They meet without schedules, for coffee that grows cold, because conversation takes priority, for walks through neighborhoods. Ethan once drove past without noticing, for evenings where silence is not filled out of obligation, but shared understanding. Margaret's health stabilizes enough for her to host small dinners again, and when Claire joins them, there are no introductions, no roles to perform, just familiarity built slowly, honestly. One evening, as autumn settles in and the city softens, Ethan invites Claire to the rooftop garden of his building, a place he rarely uses because it offers no privacy from his own thoughts. The skyline stretches wide, lights flickering like possibilities rather than pressure. He does not bring a ring. He does not rehearse a speech. He tells her simply that he is still learning how to live without hiding behind agreements, that loving her has required him to unlearn control and accept uncertainty, and that if she chooses a future with him, it will be one shaped by mutual consent, not fear. Claire listens, feeling the steadiness in his voice where certainty once lived, and she answers with the truth she has guarded carefully. She tells him she stayed because she saw the man he could be when no one was watching, because kindness mattered more to her than security, because walking away would have been easier than trusting again. She says yes, not to a promise of perfection, but to the work of choosing each other openly. The engagement is private, shared first with Margaret, whose tears are not of relief, but of gratitude. Gratitude that her son finally understands what legacy truly means. When the wedding comes, it is small and deliberate, held in a restored community space funded quietly by Ethan's foundation, a place Claire once helped design programs for families in transition. There are no grand gestures meant to impress, no cameras, no contracts tucked away for reassurance. Just vows spoken clearly, witnessed by those who matter, built on honesty rather than illusion. As they stand together, Ethan realizes the irony of it all, that he once hired a wife to protect his image, only to discover that love demands visibility, not concealment. Claire smiles, not because her life has become easier, but because it has become truer. Later, as the evening fades and they step into the city as husband and wife, the ring she wears now is not lighter or heavier than the first, but it carries meaning earned rather than assigned. The story of how they began will never be simple, but it will always be theirs, a reminder that the most powerful agreements are not signed on paper, but chosen daily through action, integrity, and courage. And somewhere in the quiet that follows, Ethan understands at last that true wealth was never about control, but about having someone who stays when there is no contract left to enforce it.